The look and personality of Pokémon nowadays seems to be a frequent point of criticism towards the series. In an attempt to bring a bit more relatability to the world around us, the 6th generation pivoted in the direction of a 3D world as opposed to the sprite-based environment we had grown accustomed to this entire time. Some Pokémon may have benefited from this change, but it seems like the grand scale of the Pokédex has taken a hit in the looks department from this transition. In this video, I'll be highlighting 3 Fire-type Pokémon whose designs were treated better in the older generations, and don't seem to give off the same personality nowadays as they did once upon a time. If you enjoy this video, please subscribe, as over 98% of you who watch aren't subscribed to the channel. Typhlosion is one of the most upfront examples of how a Pokémon can lose out in the design department when making the switch to 3D models. With the most defining aspect of this Pokémon and its entire evolution line being the glowing fire bursting out of its upper back, it was disappointing to see such an explosive looking creature lose its only flare, no pun intended, in most of its appearances in the new generations. Introduced in Generation 2, Typhlosion was created around the resources of a generation where small pixelated sprites carried the personality of the game. Though lacking the extensive potential to portray the personality of its creatures in comparison to the newer generations, Gold and Silver did an exceptional job of showing you the fiery temper to Typhlosion. Arguably the most defining aspect of Typhlosion is the jagged nature to its collar of fire. Fire being defining aspects of different parts of the body isn't new to the design of fire types in general, but most take it in a direction of mimicking tendencies of real fire, whereas the Typhlosion line have a distinct difference in their approach, that of which gives them a more pronounced attempt in getting across their explosive attitude. Typhlosion kept this part of its design intact all the way to Generation 5, only gaining more and more detail along the way as color quality and pixel depth improved over time. With Generation 5 introducing the dynamic trait of animation, Typhlosion and its pre-evolutions were some of the biggest beneficiaries, as small of a difference as it may seem. Adding a small pulsing property to the even more jagged looking collar of flames, Typhlosion looks like a pent-up bundle of pure hot fire. As some of the Pokédex entries read, it has a rage that, when at its peak, erupts and causes Typhlosion to set everything around it ablaze. Knowing this defining aspect of the personality to this creature, try and feel a need to apply such a precautious approach to this little thing. I understand that Typhlosion is not going to be that pissed off all the time, so it makes sense when given more ability to expand the depth of these Pokemon, they would show off how the line would look in their off time from losing their temper. But in the spirit of keeping Pokemon as a presentation of fantasy creatures in this imagined world, I feel as if a unique personality like Typhlosion's can only be showed off properly in the environment of older games. This thing is supposed to be capable of exhibiting volcano-like eruptions when it gets pushed over the edge. Do you believe that just from this little guy? Though Scarlet and Violet did deliver on restoring some of the flair to Typhlosion's design, I'm not sure if it was quite what I was hoping for when they ended up finally listening to the fans. Oh, Entei, what did they do to you? I'm not sure if I should run away or give it a treat. But seriously, this is such a far cry from the impression that was left on all of us when we chased it down in Johto, or even when we saw it in the 3rd movie. You could say that it's hard to expect the cinematic style quality that animation provided in the movie, but I think the earlier generations nailed it pretty well. This is another instance similar to Typhlosion, where jagged edges and fiery power are tough to carry over to a 3D model. Generations 2 through 5, however, granted Entei the rugged nature he needed to accurately portray the description of his Pokédex entry. Volcanoes erupt when it barks. Unable to control its extreme power, it races headlong around the lands. It doesn't come across as an agile creature from its appearance, but its stature and powerful stance prove that it could achieve such feats. Now, in contrast with Typhlosion's approach, Entei really doesn't have any real fire going on in his design. The execution is more in the mane that represents a sort of flowing smoke to pair with the royal nature that you would associate with a lion and the golden crown cresting its eyes. There are still elements to the dog-like visuals it needs to touch on, being a part of the subtype that it is, but as clearly shown in the Generation 5 sprite, it doesn't take over the model in a way that makes you want to pet it. This thing means business, and if it barks, it's gonna make a fucking volcano explode. That's convincing. This isn't to say that these properties didn't carry over when they designed the newer models, it just doesn't hit in the way it did in sprite form because of how personality is portrayed differently between generations. A bulk of the sprite design in earlier generations was the posing of the Pokemon. Not only was it a chance to show off some personality possessed by the creature, it highlighted the key parts of what allowed them to stand out as unique. though almost all the factors that went into the conception of this Pokemon in sprite form didn't carry over to the 6th generation and onward. What I believe to be the most egregious example of these 3D transitions is the illustrious Rapidash. Likely not as popular as the 2 previous examples, Rapidash surprisingly has better design choices than either of them, even with Entei having legendary status. Rapidash mimics the biology of a horse. I mean, duh. But where both Rapidash and its pre-evolution Ponyta shine are in the subtle incorporation of flames within the aesthetic highlights of a typical horse. Transforming a horse's mane and tail into bellowing flames was genius in providing just enough twist on an animal we know from the world around us to make it feel from a fantasy setting like Pokemon presents. Given to us in the 1st generation, Rapidash's sprite was forced to show off some sort of swift movement in order to showcase that this is a Pokemon true to its inspiration's origins. The fire gracing its back always felt like an active flame that was chaotically affected by the flow of wind created by the lightning-fast speed this creature travels at. This is especially cool when you consider its Pokédex entry from Ruby and Sapphire, which says that when it gets serious, its fiery manes flare and blaze as it gallops its way up to 150 miles per hour. That's a lot of miles per hour. Moving over to its model starting in X and Y, the feature that made it stand out as opposed to many other Pokemon renditions of real-life animals has been turned into a simple part of its anatomy. This fire is like attached to the back of this Pokemon's neck. It looks like some tropical fruit cotton candy. Maybe I'm being a little harsh, but come on. When you go from the blazing flame shown in the Generation 5 sprite, it's hard to compromise with hardly animated fire. This ponytail gig that Game Freak gave Rapidash in these newer generations is such an insult to what made its simplicity cool. It used to get away with being a simple horse because of the epic addition of all those flames to emphasize the fierce nature of the Pokemon. Now it just kind of feels like a generic horse that's got some serious flow. And don't even get me started on the Galarian form. If you enjoyed this video, please check out the rest of my channel and consider leaving a like and subscribing, as it really helps me out. Thank you.